Okay, so if I could have every presenter from this morning come up on the stage for some questions. Remember, this time is for questions like that you didn't think of during our presentation or something like that.
On the maps of the total distribution, did you delineate on those maps any like real big physical barriers like waterfalls that would keep fish from moving?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, that's one of the parts of the surveys, especially from the inception, is to look for fish passage barriers. And, those maps didn't show any of them. And, so one of the biggest things that in the beginning that we were looking as a perceived fish passage barrier was documented beaver dams. And also, really monitoring those beaver dams because there was, especially 25 years ago, when we began this effort, a belief that has largely been disproven that these beaver dams are potential fish passage barriers. And then conversely, also in the juvenile survey, we do look for barriers, and waterfalls are one of the things that we have found. For example, Shackelford, most people are aware that waterfall is pretty much the end of the measuring for all fish just because they can't.
Questions, but Eric or Mark, not so.
Well, we'll see, let's.
Great, I'm getting old, Marty. I think Eric, we've been focusing on drought being a challenge for these cohorts. And my impression, and I may be wrong, and you can clarify it, but before we really started counting the cohort and trying to figure out how many were here, we quickly identified two low cohorts and one decent one. And my understanding was that the two cohorts were a result of some massive flood event that hammered the young of the year as well as the reds at the same time. So basically, the two cohorts out of three were hammered by one storm. Is that correct? And I mean, are we, it just seems to me that a lot of work of everybody could be hammered in, 1 year. And with the focus on agriculture and all of this other stuff, it just seems to me that, our emphasis is somewhat misplaced.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rick, and I honestly don't know the answer about what led to those extremely weak cohorts. There is some speculation, but I think your bigger point is most apropos. The natural events and catastrophic events like drought and fire can negatively affect to the point of wiping out a species that we've been spending a lot of time about. When I first started in Scott 1999, my mentor Jim Kilgore told me that the biggest concern we have as a fisheries community is fire and the effects of fire on the fishery. And at the time I didn't get it, and I think that really speaks to, what OES is doing, what we're all doing as a community, kind of what Betsy was speaking to, is, this watershed is from top to bottom and, gravity works, and things that, like a catastrophic fire in Patterson Creek, Peter Creek, and the results coming from that could potentially cause, so we really need to look across the landscape to try to help everything, and that's why single species management of you have to protect that fish there is key, and will not do anything other than frustrate people who live on this landscape.
Thank you all. This is for whoever wants to take it. It looks to me that the data suggests that we failed so far to prevent the slide towards extinction for Scott River Fall Chinook. The only thing we really talked about, we didn't even talk about sprayers and all that, which should be here. But why are we failing so far? And what needs to change in order for us to start to succeed?
Was that for Betsy or me?
Brian.
Hey,
I actually think it's the way.
yeah, I mean, it's hard, we understand, or I believe that we understand that there's multiple stressors on these populations, right? And that comes in the form of harvest, land use practices, climate, and you could go on up and down the list, right? And speaking to someone, I think that the question that you pose and Rick's are quite similar in my mind. It's like the next catastrophic event could be in 6 months, in 2 days, in 2 years, in 10 years, right? And so we're trying to build resiliency in these fish populations to be able to be adaptable and withstand the next stimulus, right? And so I'm not gonna sit up here and say it's exactly this particular reason, and maybe it seems simple to you, but it seems complicated to me. And I think it's important for us to just continue to build resiliency in the populations, so that they can be more adaptable and make it through the next bottleneck. We've seen it, like, for example, with these, like with the coho populations, right? We see that trajectory and the growth that's possible within the population, but it's not going to go up forever, right? We have the 2013 example to show us that it builds, and thank goodness it did, because it just got ratcheted down related to a drought situation, and then now it's going to take some time, but it'll keep working its way, and it'll come back up, and then it'll get knocked back down. And so we just got to make sure that we're providing for resiliency. Yeah.
Catastrophic events that have done it is why we're not recovering, because the catastrophic events is what you seem to be saying. And I think it's because fishing water, personally.
Yeah, thanks, Luce.
I mean, I think just to add, and I don't remember the exact 2 years, but we had those 2 years where it was almost 500 Chinook salmon in Scott when 04, I was still working with the department, and those populations have recovered. So it's not as simple as we're seeing fluctuations, so it's complex.
And I'll just say, one last thing. I mean, I don't want to, spend too much time on this really, but Felice, there's a collective effort from, I think, everybody in the majority of the folks in the room to try to figure out how and when to provide water at the most critical times for these animals. And there's, a lot of efforts that are occurring that, that I'm not aware of, but I do know that, collectively people are trying to be, targeted in their management changes and decisions to try to provide more water at the most important times for these animals.
I agree with folks in trying.
Yeah. All right, that wraps up our panel. Please,